Okay, I started the recording. We're on. And we'll let Lydia in. Hello, Lydia.
Hi.
Was there a question you had to answer, like there's a recording on and you're okay with it?
That's fine with me.
No, I didn't ask you that when you signed on.
Yes, there was.
It did? Okay. That's what I thought. I just had pressed the button before you came in.
Yep.
And then there was a sort of a lag, so I figured that's what it was. Okay, we're starting to gather here. It's a couple of minutes after 8 o'clock, so let's pray. And we'll kind of begin with a few things that folks have submitted, and then we can go from there with questions that those who are on with us will have. We're recording, so we'll post this on our YouTube channel. Probably tonight, maybe tomorrow. We shall see how fast it processes and gets to us. O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasurer of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one. Well, welcome everyone. I have gotten several requests to post a prayer or share something with folks so that they could pray about the Holy Land. And in 2017, there was a prayer that was sent out to all of the Russian Orthodox dioceses for peace in the Holy Land. And I just put that into the notes. So you'll see that there. It'll also eventually appear on our website. I don't remember exactly when it is, sometime this week. But you get a special preview of that. It's not a long prayer. And you don't have to say it, but if you would like to pray for peace, that would probably be a pretty good place to start. Yesterday was also the Sunday. The main saint of the day was Saint James, the Apostle James Alphaeus, and he started his ministry in Gaza. So he's probably a pretty good saint also to pray, to ask prayers of if we would like to pray for peace in the land where the Lord was born. And I think that that's something probably quite appropriate. But we give you that option and wanted to save it. Okay, good. Questions are coming in already on the chat. That's super. We will get to those. And let me just start with a quick recap of yesterday. Yesterday we had a really nice day at St. Vladimir's. We had more than 100 people in church. We communed from 3 chalices. The sermon probably left a little something to be desired, but everything else was good. And we were celebrating St. James, as I mentioned, Alphaeus, a very interesting saint. And it was just really a nice day. Then we had our 9 to 12-year-old and teen youth groups, which was also quite pleasant. We started talking about a book called A Day of Holy Life, which is a super book, and I think good for all of us to read. It was written by the bishop that sent the monks to Alaska on that original mission, Metropolitan Gregory of St. Petersburg. It's published by Jordanville and is pretty readily available. If you have any trouble getting it, if you'd like to see it, I know we have it in the kiosk, or at least we did. Sometimes these things get sold out, but in any case, that was a very nice conversation with the kids. The girls played a board game, and the boys decided that we should shoot baskets and play pig. I think we kind of got up to Pygmalion by the time it was all said and done, but it was very pleasant. Young adults meet this Sunday at 6 o'clock. So I've had some people ask, we have a catechism class, and is that just for people who are preparing to be baptized? And the answer is no. Anyone's welcome to join the catechism class, whether you're an Orthodox Christian for many years, whether you're just inquiring, wherever you are in your journey, you're welcome to join. And that's 6 o'clock every Friday night. Well, 6 o'clock is the service, and then after that we have the catechism class, and it's available here online. although it's great if you can come and join us, that's ideal. But you can do it just like this. You can ask questions, and I think it's really quite interesting and useful. So everyone is welcome to participate in that. And we know that a lot of folks, especially those who grew up in the Soviet Union, never got a chance really to be catechized or had to catechize themselves. So this could be a good opportunity for them anyway. Anyone is welcome, so please join us if you'd like to. That's 6 o'clock on Friday nights. Not this Sunday, but next Sunday, the 5th of November, we will celebrate the Liturgy of St. James, the Brother of the Lord. This is a liturgy that is served only once per year in the Russian Orthodox Church, and in most parishes, it's not served. Monasteries and seminaries, it's not unusual. Cathedrals, not that unusual. But thank God we've been able to serve that regularly at St. Vladimir's. It's a really beautiful service and quite different. And we encourage people to join us on that Sunday, even if they aren't able to join us regularly on Sunday. That would be a real special Sunday to be at St. Vladimir's to participate in that beautiful and unusual service. It's probably the most ancient of the liturgies. What do we need to know about it? This is the question I was asked. What do we need to know about the Liturgy of St. James? So it's probably the most ancient of the liturgies that we have, that we serve on any kind of regular basis. There is a Liturgy of St. Mark, which is not really served regularly in the Orthodox Church. It does exist. It's blessed for use, but it's not really used. It could be equally as ancient. But this was the liturgy that was in use in Jerusalem probably about 1 century after Christ, and was written down. It was never. It did not get widely spread. In that early time of the church, there were a lot of different ways that the Divine Liturgy was served in local spaces because there was no way to communicate. There was no way to standardize. A bishop would ordain a priest and teach him how to serve the liturgy. He would memorize everything, and then the priest would go from the bishop and would serve. So there was not any standardization really in the ancient church. I mean, there was certainly similarities. It was only after the Edict of Milan that these things could be standardized. But this was written down at that time and is used occasionally. And Euphemia reminded me that it's not always on a Sunday, and in fact, it's almost never on a Sunday. It's just every 6 years that it's on a Sunday. So this year will be a Sunday. So it's a cool opportunity. Usually we serve it on a weekday. Right. So there were a couple of questions that were submitted using our database that we send out when we send out the information about Curious Vlad, and that was great. I was really glad to see that. So I'm going to address those, and then we're going to get to your questions that you've already been asking in the chat, which is a great way to do it. If you don't want to raise your hand and speak, you're more than welcome to do that. Okay, this one's definitely going to call for the glasses. However, okay, this. Okay, so this one there's two from last week. Did Father Colin address this, the day of prayer and fasting that the Patriarch of Jerusalem called for? Anyone tell me? I'm going to take that silence as a no, and then I'll answer the question. So, considering the situation in the Holy Land, the Patriarch in Jerusalem released a statement calling for a day of prayer and fasting tomorrow on 10/17. In times like this, are there any prayers we should specifically say? As for fasting, how strict is this called to be? So, this is not a common occurrence where we would be fasting on a day when we would not otherwise be fasting liturgically. Wait, what was it, 17th? Maybe that was a Wednesday or Friday. I don't know. We're too far past that. In any case, we would fast as we usually would, as strictly as we can, because the point is to struggle on that day. But certainly, if we were going to fast on such a special day like that, we would be following the Orthodox fast, which is to abstain from meat and dairy products. So I hope that helps. And actually, I put up that prayer for peace in the Holy Land based on that question that I read earlier today on our website, and what I pasted into the notes here. So I think that answers the second part of that. And then there was another question. Would you mind clarifying the difference between theosis and sanctification? Yeah, that's probably like 7 lectures altogether to really kind of unpack that. But theosis is what salvation is in the church. God became man so that man might become God by grace. That's the way we understand theosis. That's what we understand our salvation is. Salvation is not just you're a good boy and then you get a lollipop at the end when you die. You get your reward. That's not what it's about at all. It's about being good, being moral, being a person who is doing the right thing. That's like a baseline for us as Orthodox Christians, right? What we're striving for is to be transformed, to be transfigured into the sons and daughters of God. That's what theosis is about. And the fathers even imply that this is a process which begins in this life and even continues in the next. So this is something really great and amazing and wonderful, and we really do ourselves and our children a disservice if we sort of look at salvation as a reward we get for just having not been the worst pagan on our block. That's not at all what being an Orthodox Christian is. We're striving to become the sons and daughters of God by God's grace, which we have in the church. So it's something great and wonderful, and it's something amazing. And we should not see it as anything other than that. Sanctification, you might say that someone is sanctified, and sometimes we use that word for the saints. That word also might be used as synonymous with blessing. So we could say that a church was sanctified, the building itself, because the blessing of a church, it's a sacramental thing. So it's kind of sacramentally blessed. But I think the question probably was aiming at when we're talking about theosis and sanctification regarding a person. And I think sanctification is what happens from theosis, right? So if you are transfigured in this life, if you're transformed into the child of God, then you're sanctified, and you may very well be glorified, not just in this life, I'm not just in the next life, but perhaps even in this life, because that's what saints are. It's not that saints are the only holy people or the only people in the heavenly kingdom, not at all. It's just because, according to God's wisdom, it's important for us to have examples here in this life of what it means to be sanctified, what it means to follow the gospel, that we see that our efforts are not without reward. Then there are those who are glorified in the heavenly kingdom, and there are those who are glorified both in the heavenly kingdom and here on earth. And how the Lord makes the decision about that is a mystery that we can't understand. Maybe we'll understand. Maybe it'll be very clear if we are there in the heavenly kingdom with all of those people. But from this point of view, from our living in the world, it's hard to understand why some seem to be glorified here on the earth and others who live just the exact same life. We don't see that they're glorified on the earth, but we would assume that they are in the heavenly kingdom. So as Orthodox Christians, we're okay with mystery, and it's good for us to not know everything. We're not the creator, we're the creation, and it's good for us to humble ourselves in that way. Okay, good. We had another couple of questions that came in. Hold on, let's see if I can get to these. And then I will get to the ones that you've asked in the chat, I promise. Oh, this is about tradition, like Orthodox tradition, like the scriptures. We could say that even the scriptures are part of tradition with a large T, like a tradition that's almost like dogma. Whereas there are small T traditions, like, let's say, the way that the hymns are sung in the church, or that the way that the clergy's vestments are, or maybe even what the clergy wear on the street. Like now, what you see me wearing, that was not what they wore in the first century. And the church is most interested in dogma, that is the unchanging truths of the faith. And this is one of the most important things about Orthodox Christianity. You understand that the faith is not going to change. The way that the faith is preached, using what technologies are available, the way that the hymns are sung in the church, not the content, that won't change, but the melodies, that could change over time. Obviously it has. I mean, if you go to a Serbian church and you go to a Russian church, you can, the same thing will be sung on Sunday morning, but the hymns are, the way that they're sung musically is completely different. It doesn't mean that one is better or one is worse, or one is right, or one is wrong. That's not a question. It's the content of what's being sung or what's being read in the church that matters, not exactly how that's done. So, but that's not the question. That's just me digressing a little bit. So how can we know which traditions in the church are big T traditions and shouldn't ever change versus little T traditions that may change? I think that this is something that we become more comfortable with over time, and usually we ask others. Maybe that's a good question. We ask our godparent, or we ask one of the clergy if we're not quite sure about that. I think relatively quickly we begin to understand that the tradition of the church, like St. Paul is alluding to, those things that we have taught you by word, not just by our epistle. That there are other things besides what's just in the Bible. It becomes, I think, relatively clear relatively soon, but I think the key is to ask. And when we don't know something, or even when we're tempted by something, we should see this as the Lord tapping us on the shoulder and saying, you need to learn this. Not you need to be tempted by this, but you need to learn this. So read or ask. And in this way, we grow spiritually and we learn. And the Lord will use us when we learn these things to also teach others. So maybe that sort of answers the question. The person that asked the question is online. So if that person decides to ask a follow-up question, then you'll know who that is. All right, another question. And this is a question about the transgender movement and about pronouns. So how do we deal with this as Orthodox Christians? So Father Colin and I have been talking about this and how we need to give a lecture about Orthodox anthropology, and we just haven't quite got our brains around it. For those who aren't on Sisterhood mailing list, you don't know this, but Katie's in labor right now. They're at the hospital, so God willing, they'll have a healthy baby girl soon, either tonight or early in the morning. And then once they're settled back in at home with the third child, then maybe we'll finally tackle this question about Orthodox anthropology. But the answer is, I guess there are two ways to look at it. Like, the issue with pronouns is a difficult one because on one hand, we should not be promoting untruth. That's not really right for us as Orthodox Christians, right? We shouldn't be embracing a lie. We should be embracing things that are good, true, beautiful, right. So to say to someone to embrace their pronoun, that where it's, you're obviously talking to a man, but he wants to be called she. I think that's really difficult for us, and I think a lot of it is contextual. Like, it may be that in your work environment, that's just absolutely impossible to not do. Then you have to decide, is this a big enough deal for me to like, I'm going to leave this job because I'm not willing to embrace that lie. Maybe that's right. I tend to think, but it may not be for you. And the church does not have an absolute stance on this. There is a canon, interestingly, that states that men cannot wear women's clothes and women cannot wear men's clothes. That's interesting. Why? Because canons are not written in the abstract. If that canon exists, it means that was a problem. That was a problem in the church, and a canon needed to be written to clarify that was not okay. So it's not that the church has never dealt with this, but that's probably about the extent to which it has. So that gives us a hint about how the church feels about this. The Christian anthropology is very clear. There is a man, there are men, there are women. Men are not women, and women are not men. Now, if someone hasn't thought of this yet, you will shortly, so we might as well address it. What about those few women who impersonated men and went to a men's monastery and became saints? Because if they're saints, then it must mean that the church absolutely embraces transgenderism, and why are we talking about this at all? And of course, that's I'm being facetious. Those are extreme examples. Those are not things that those are exceptions. That's not the rule. The rule in the Orthodox Church is that men's monasticism and women's monasticism are separate. They don't exist together ever. Um, Now, it is true that sometimes there's a convent which is sort of economically dependent on a monastery, or it could be vice versa. That's possible too, and they may be kind of within a few miles of each other. Okay, that's not the same as living in the same place. So the exception is not the rule in the church, just like the exception is not the rule in the world. So the fact that there were several women, I don't know how many, 5, 6, 7, I forgot the exact number, who over the course of 2,000 years ended up pursuing monasticism in a men's monastery, but anonymously. No one knew that they weren't men. It does not make a rule for the church that we embrace transgenderism. At the same time, we should understand that transgender people are victims by and large. They're victims of a larger evil which is taking place in the world, and so I think it's important for us to see them as victims. And if we do that, then we'll have a proper approach to them, a proper, I would even say, love for someone who's suffering or has been a victim. You should also know that people who have started the quote unquote transition are beginning to come to the church. And I would expect that this will happen more and more. And because people don't embrace that difficult life just for kicks. They're looking for something. They're searching. They're trying to fill a void in their soul. Well, of course, we understand that's the void where God goes, but that's not what the world teaches. And so, right now, this is the hot thing. This is the fashionable thing, and of course, lately, especially, there's been a lot of preying on those who are on the autism spectrum to try to convince them that they are the opposite gender. But maybe we've reached the crescendo. Maybe we've reached the pinnacle of that. I'm not sure. I hope so, and I hope that we will go back quickly. But in any case, there are some people who have started this searching and realized that this was not going to fulfill what they wanted, and they have begun to come to the church. And so we have to be ready for that. We have to be ready to help people to heal who have been victimized in this way. Exactly how that's going to play out, I don't know, because there's never been. I mean, I have some ideas, but we're going to have a greater sort of, not just like, well, this is Father Gregory's ideas. This will be a lot higher level decision than just each priest just kind of wing it into what you want. And that's not going to happen. The bishops will have to make sort of more global decisions on that. But we aren't at that point yet. Right now, you're just starting to have a scattered number of people turning away from that, realizing that that's not going to fulfill or going to take the pain away that they are feeling, and beginning to realize that probably that pain comes from not being with God. So anyway, the issue of the pronouns. Now, these made-up pronouns, I don't even know what to do with that. Like, that's, see, I'm not living in I live near Ann Arbor, but I don't live in that woke environment because, thank God, I'm a full-time priest and I don't have to deal with. I worked at the university for 15 years. I'm sure that it would be really difficult in this situation. But the made-up ones, I don't even know what to do with that, because it's just like silliness. It's one thing if we're talking about what's good and true and beautiful and not violating that, but this is just, I mean, forgive me, it's just stupid. So again, but the question is not what's Father Gregory's opinion on this. The question is, how do we deal with that as Orthodox Christians in the workforce? And I think it's the same as the guy with the 5 o'clock shadow who claims that he's a she. I think it's that we have to decide at what can we tolerate in this situation? What can we tolerate in this situation? And it would be ideal if the world aligned with the anthropology of the church, but it doesn't. So there's no reason for us to like spend a lot of time mourning that fact, because that's just reality. So we have to decide, is it worth my job? Like, am I just going to leave this place where I have to call somebody by this fake pronoun? And I'm not mocking that or belittling that. That's a big decision. We have to support our families, so on and so forth. But I also think that there is, we also have to be true. We also have to, we have to try to do what's right. So I'm not trying to say, well, you just flip a coin, or like it's okay to not follow Christian anthropology when you're at work, and then you should follow that with your family. I don't really know how to do it. I think this is not something that lends itself to a global yes or no. I think every one of these decisions has to be made based on the merits and the sort of context in which it takes place. But the ideal is that we wouldn't take part in this charade in any way, if we can avoid that. Not even if we can avoid that. The ideal is that we would not take part in this charade. Um, Whether we can live up to that ideal all the time, I don't know the answer to that. But that would be the ideal. So I guess that was a really, really long way of me getting to that point and saying that's the ideal, that we would not participate in this charade. Yeah. But I think we should, because we're all learning and we're all trying to figure this out, I think it's good to consult with a priest about this as we figure it out together. But living in America, there are certainly some protections that we have to exercise our faith. And this is a question of faith, in my opinion. This is not a political question. Christian anthropology is not just anthropology with the adjective Christian. It's about Christianity. And I think that we have rights here in this country, and we shouldn't be afraid to exercise them, but we should understand that that's going to ostracize us in today's environment, at least in some workplaces, and especially academic workplaces. So anyway, hopefully that was not just a rant, but it added some value to people. I'm sure we'll talk about this many times. Since this is going up on YouTube, I'm sure I'll end up on some bad video about people who are transphobic. But that's unfortunate, but we have to be true to who we are. We don't have to be mean or evil. We should see people as victims, but we don't have to embrace a lie. Okay, let's get to some of the questions which are written in amazingly small type that were put into the chat. Is it considered rude for non-Orthodox, non-catechumens to not ask for a blessing, or is that a requirement only for Orthodox? It's certainly not considered rude. That's not a question. It's not rude. Is it a requirement for Orthodox? Is probably a more interesting question. We receive a blessing from a priest or a bishop because the priest or the bishop can consecrate the bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. So we receive a blessing from a priest only from his right hand. You'd never kiss the left hand of a priest. Sometimes the way that things work when we come to the end of the liturgy and I'm holding the cross in my left hand, people want to kiss it. Usually I can explain that that's not something they should do. Other people are just like very zealous and grab literally with both hands, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to break my arm here. But the priest, you kiss his right hand. A bishop has a double portion of grace. You could kiss his right or his left hand. That's why he blesses with two hands, and the priest only blesses with one hand. That reminds us. So for a bishop, it's a different story, but we don't interact with a lot of bishops, honestly, in our lives as Orthodox Christians. A few people live in cathedral parishes. We aren't a cathedral parish, so it's probably easiest for us just to remember that you kiss the priest's right hand. You ask for a blessing not because you like that priest, but because that priest consecrates the body and blood of Christ. It has the grace to do that. So that would not be a bad thing for someone who's not Orthodox to do, because getting a blessing from a priest is a blessing. and it's something good. So it certainly couldn't hurt, but it's not required by any means. And I don't know any priests that are insulted by shaking someone's hand. So that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do as well. All right, another question in the chat. Yes, Euphemia.
I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
With that. Well, I guess first I'll ask Father Bless.
God bless you.
Thank you. So why is it the right hand?
So when the priest consecrates the body and blood of Christ, he does it with his right hand. Okay, so that's why you kiss the priest's right hand. Why does he do it with his right hand? I think it's because the same idea as why we wear our wedding rings on our right hands, or at least we put them on people's right hands during the wedding ceremony. If they switch them later, whatever. But in the scripture, right always symbolizes good, and left is the opposite, right? The sheep are on the right hand, the goats are on the left hand. It doesn't mean that left-handed people are bad or that goats are bad. Goats are good. But anyway, the point is that right in the scriptures is always symbolizes good, and that was true in the ancient world too. That's why it's like that in the scripture. So that's why it's the priest's right hand. But hypothetically, the bishop could consecrate the body and blood of Christ with his left hand instead of with his right hand, because of the double portion of grace that bishops are given. Yeah, so I hope that answers that question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, good. So, okay, here's another one, but again, too small. What is the Orthodox standing on donating your body parts for science? What is their standing on cremation? And please explain. Okay, so there's no canon about the donating of organs. I think that there is a limit, though, a logical limit, and let me explain. If we are doing something to help someone else live, let's say, that seems like a very Orthodox thing to do. That we would help someone to stay alive. So something like giving blood is perfectly acceptable. There was in the 60s, the doctor that used to care for the monks and the seminarians in Jordanville, he would do it free of charge, but he asked them to give blood twice a year, and so everybody did that. So I think that's very informative for us. Giving one's organs, again, that seems very Orthodox. There doesn't seem to be really an issue there. There is a question of, well, the body is the sort of temple of the soul, right? Well, that's true. That's true. But the church generally is pretty clear about things that are wrong and to not do. And the only thing that you can find about organ donation was sort of just a little something that Metropolitan Philaret of New York wrote. And he was a confessor. He suffered for Christ. He's not been glorified as a saint, but the Chinese communists burned down his house and forgot to ask him to leave first. Well, they didn't forget. They were trying to get rid of him. In any case, he suffered. He always had a droopy eye because of that burns that he received there. Anyway, so it's not, his opinion is not nothing. But he mentioned that he felt in one of his articles that donating the heart seemed a bridge too far because the fathers call the heart the organ of the soul. I can see that. It is true that when you receive a heart transplant, that you always have to have also like psychological counseling and stuff like that. That may be true of other organs. I just happen to know that that's true for the heart. So, I could see that. That's not certainly that's not the decision of the universal church, but that's Metropolitan Philaret's opinion, and his opinion deserves to be listened to. But I think we could see that either way. But as far as other organs, there's no teaching that the church has against it, and so we can understand that that's probably permissible. But the church also has a practice of having an open casket at the funeral, and I don't think that we should discount that as nothing. There the divine services are sort of dogmatic theology filtered to the nth degree. Like Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeev wrote, well, actually, he gave this in the talk at Kiev Theological Academy, maybe like 15 years ago, that if he found two contradictory teachings, dogmatic teachings, one in a dogmatic theology textbook and the other in a divine service, he would choose the one in the divine service to be correct and reject what was in the textbook. Because who filters the divine services? It's the Holy Spirit, right? So this is the most pure expression of the church's dogmatic theology is in the divine services. And so the fact that we have an open casket, that's not nothing, and it's something actually that we should be very attentive to. So that would mean that there needs to be some limit, except in extraordinary circumstances. There needs to be some limit as to what we could donate. So I think that the key to this is that if we feel strongly that we want to do this, it's certainly nothing wrong, and we could even say that it's something quite good, but it needs to be very clear, like where is the limit. I've thought about this a lot. Doesn't mean that I have hit the sweet spot, but based on what the church teaches and the fact that we need to have an open casket, it seems to me that organ donation is probably just fine. There's certainly no teaching against it. Even donating skin, I think, which is, people don't think about that, but that's like, for burn victims, that's absolutely crucial. That seems permissible, but I think there would need to be an end to that, like not from the face, not from the hands, because you do need to have an open casket at your funeral. Now, in extraordinary circumstances, with the bishop's blessing, then that could be abrogated. Bishop can exercise economy, the bishop can exercise strictness, but that would have to be, I think, his call if we were going to go beyond that. I certainly wouldn't be comfortable going beyond that. Yeah, so maybe that explains something. Maybe that made it more complicated. So, Lydia, you, if you want to do a follow-up, you can ask me, of course. What's the church's standing on cremation? The church teaches that cremation is not an Orthodox practice, because it's not, never has been, always was a pagan practice. And the Orthodox Church especially tends to be very against pagan practices. Now, some pagan practices unquestionably got sanctified by the church. When the church comes to a new area and it's inhabited by pagans, sometimes some of the practices which are not contrary to orthodoxy get kind of pulled into the church and sanctified in an Orthodox way. That's not always, but that is certainly, that does happen. I don't see that happening with cremation, at least not anytime soon. The only part of the Orthodox Church that blesses for cremation is the Japanese church, because that is the law in Japan. Everyone's cremated. There are no exceptions except by the emperor. Only the emperor can make an exception to this. So there are a couple of, there's a bishop who's now a saint, Saint Nicholas of Japan, who is buried on the grounds of the Resurrection Cathedral, which he built in Tokyo. The emperor signed the edict to allow him to not be cremated. And I think one of the priests, and I think it was that priest, the first priest that he ordained, who, interestingly, he met when that priest, who was not a priest at that time, obviously, came to kill him. He was an assassin who was sent by the Japanese to get rid of this tiresome priest who kept attracting people to Orthodox Christianity. And so the assassin came, and Father Nicholas at that time says, I know who you are. I know why you're here. He says, but before you kill me, at least let me tell you about Jesus Christ. So okay, won't change my mind, but I should give you your last wish. Well, it did change his mind. He became an Orthodox Christian and was the first Japanese priest. So I believe he's also buried there. That's it. So what they do in Japan is for the Orthodox Christians, which is not it's not a huge minority, but it's not dinky. Orthodox Christianity is an official religion in Japan. At one time, it was only that and Shintoism. There may be others now, but in any case, this after someone dies, then their body is prepared, just like for all other Orthodox Christians, washed and prepared for burial. The funeral takes place in the church, and then the person goes and is cremated. So it's not that they're cremated and then there's a funeral, the funeral, and then the cremation. But that's an extreme situation. That's one very small part of the Orthodox Church. As a rule, the church doesn't bless cremation, and the reason is because it's a pagan practice. The Lord will turn us back to dust as He decides, or maybe not, because occasionally He decides not to do that. So just as it's a bad idea to cremate everybody, because then we'll never know if someone should have had incorrupt relics, it's also a very bad idea to practice abortion, because we're probably killing the people who will cure cancer and other things like that. Not just to mention that it is completely that the church considers it murder. So yeah, so I hope that answers the question and that the explanation was not more complicated than the question itself. Okay, so far I've heard that the saints have often persevered in great sufferings and that we can learn from their faith in said suffering. Is there a saint that I could learn from with regard to divorce? Yeah, that's a good question. Unwanted divorce, clarifying unwanted divorce. So I think that it's very wise to read the lives of the saints, just in general, because it helps us understand the Orthodox approach to the life's problems. We can't always exactly do what the saints do, but by reading the lives of the saints, we sort of begin to understand from a directionally correct point of view how we live as Orthodox Christians in the world, how we deal with difficulties, because life's difficulties, because okay, we have some like bioethical questions maybe that are relatively new that maybe the saints didn't deal with, but in general, even those things are just shades of what life is. And so mostly they've dealt with everything, and mostly it can be very helpful to us. For instance, St. John of Shanghai in San Francisco, when someone would ask him a question, he would almost always reference the life of a saint or the scripture, sometimes both. That I think is a very telling example. The person that jumps to mind to me, the saint, is Saint Paul the Simple. I think he's a very good saint in this regard, because essentially the same thing happened to him. In those days, it was not divorce. I don't think that there was even probably such a thing in those early years. But in any case, if you look up the life of St. Paul the Simple, I think that will be helpful and interesting to you. And that he's certainly available online in English. But if you have any trouble finding it, just send me a note and I'll make sure that you get it. When our Archbishop Peter was born, he was born on the feast of Saint Pantaleon, and his mother wanted to name him Pantaleon. And the Bishop of San Francisco, which was not St. John, it was the one from before, Archbishop Tikhon, who was also a very saintly person. In any case, he came to the hospital because he was friends with the family. Obviously, the bishop doesn't usually do that, but he did anyway. And Ludwig's mother said, "Okay, we named that first one Sergei, and this one we want to name him Pantaleon because of the day." And the bishop essentially said, "That's really nice, but no, that's probably not a really good idea. Living as we do here in America, we need to have a name which is not so exotic." So he was named Paul, and now as a monk, his name, because all bishops are monks, of course, his name in monasticism was changed to Peter. So he's had two names in his life, Paul and Peter, and he's never been named after an apostle. He was named Paul after St. Paul the Simple, and he is named Peter after St. Peter of Krutitsa, who's one of the new martyrs of Russia. So that's like really in the weeds, but I think something very interesting about our bishop, that he's been both named Peter and Paul and never been named after the apostles. Okay. Okay. So Daryl asked, what about embalming, which is required for an open casket? So this is a really interesting question about embalming. We see that it was practiced in the Old Testament sometimes not. Jews don't do it now, as a rule. Christians never practiced embalming as a rule, but it became popular in North America for various reasons. And in this generation, I would say, of clergy, there's been several sort of studies about this and a lot of research done. And it turns out that although embalming is very popular and that the funeral homes like it a lot because the body looks a lot nicer usually and stays longer, of course, in better condition when it's embalmed. But there are certain laws about embalming, like you can't cross many state lines without a body being embalmed. But if you are going to be buried in the same state where you died, then it's not necessary in most cases for you to be embalmed. So it just depends on the situation. But I don't believe there's any state in our days that requires it absolutely for an open casket. But the funeral directors like it a lot because they think it reflects badly on them if the body is not in like pristine condition. So what we've found is that when folks don't want to be embalmed, and that's normal because it's not really an Orthodox practice, although I would say it's about 50-50 in America, or maybe a little bit more, maybe more people are embalmed, but there's a lot of people who aren't. So usually when they're not, we tend to do the funerals more quickly maybe than even on the third day, and that's fine. You know, in most Orthodox countries, someone will be buried on the third day, maybe only in the winter, in the cold months. In the warm months, they may be buried on the day they died or the next day. So we'd either do it early, or we'd make sure that that person was kept very cool until they came to the church for the funeral. But it is possible to do it. So, but we've only kind of learned that, I think, in this generation. Yeah, so it's possible to do it, and we found that generally we've gotten permission pretty readily to transport, at least to Jordanville. From the Midwest, we can usually find a route through states that don't require bodies to be embalmed by crossing state, but when they cross state lines. So it's getting easier to not be embalmed if you don't want to be embalmed. And I would say that it's the sort of most Orthodox practice would be to not be embalmed. But it's not easy. You have to really work it out ahead of time. You have to be careful to die in the right place. Obviously, you have no control over that, but or little control over that. But it is possible to do it. Yeah, it is possible to have even an open casket without a person being embalmed. And Daryl, I think we had an open casket for George for sure, and I think he didn't get embalmed, but I might be wrong. I might be wrong. So for everybody else on the call, you probably don't know who we're talking about, but one of our I would say almost original parishioners of our St. Vladimir Church, George Petrovsky, very interesting person, and he was a very important supporter of the church and really dedicated his life to serving the church. Never got married, never got ordained, although he did finish Catholic seminary and was there was a date for him to be ordained a Catholic priest, and he became Orthodox. But I see, Daryl, that you unmuted yourself, so you probably want to answer what I asked.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, because it was closed casket casket.
Yeah, if you
I
it
remember
was a
you
closed.
opened his casket outside to put
Yes,
the absolution or whatever in there, and it
yes,
was
we
closed
did.
in the church.
We did, and he had, I believe, he had been dead a few days at home, hadn't
Yeah,
he?
that's true also. Yeah.
So I think we just kind of agreed with the funeral director that that's the way we do it. But it's really like everyone is kind of a negotiation. And for instance, with Mulek, they're pretty just fine with that, with having an open casket, if someone's not embalmed. But they want that body in their hands relatively quickly after they die, if that's going to be the case, because they want to make sure that they're very cold until they get to the church. Good. That was a great question. Really interesting
Yeah, I thought it was a state
conversation.
law. I thought you had to get embalmed in order to have an open casket.
Yeah, it in some states that used to be the case, but it's not in most anymore. And in Michigan, it's not. I can tell you that for sure. And I'm pretty sure in Ohio, it's not either. Although I'd have to double check. The thing about the United States, which is really interesting, is that we have every state has their own laws about these kind of things. It's interesting and it's also frustrating because you kind of, if you go, we're not very far from Ohio. I mean, you live in Ohio and you're our parishioner. So that sometimes the laws can be different, but I can tell you for sure in Michigan that it is possible. But I found that it's a negotiation with the funeral director because they have their reputation that they want to keep, and I understand that. And so usually, if you're nice to them and are willing to work with them, they're usually willing to work with us. Good, great questions. We will have a lecture about funerals and burials and our cemetery, and why it's so important to prepare yourself for those parts of your life, those end parts of your life, this Sunday at St. Vladimir's. So, unfortunately, you'll have to listen to me give that lecture, but I don't usually give the lectures. It's usually Father Collins. So we thought that you could suffer a little bit. Okay. So we're almost at 9:00, and I think it's been really interesting. A lot of Father Gregory talking, but it's interesting how folks decided to use the chat this time to ask questions. I don't remember that happening last time, but that's great. We can do that, or you can always raise your hand and use your voice. One more popped in here, and we'll get to that. And if you have others, please put them in the chat now, or I'll assume at 9:00 we're going to kind of wrap up. You mentioned providing healing to those who have been misled by the trans ideology. Is there a similar ministry for those who have been misled by Mormonism? Absolutely, absolutely, because of the kind of I guess we would say cultish nature of Mormonism. There are others also, but that's kind of the one that most people know. We do work with people really closely on that and helping them to kind of deprogram, for lack of a better word, from the cult. And so yes, short answer is yes. We some folks we need to work with less and some with more, but the church does have it's especially ministers to those who have been in essentially a cult like that. So good. I'm glad you asked the question. In some places, like in Siberia, for whatever reason, I don't know why, there were a lot of totalitarian sort of cults that were very oppressive to people. And so the church there actually has a special center for helping people to integrate back into society if they can get out of such a cult. Yeah. So and we had our time here in America when it was like that too. There were a lot of cults in the 70s, 60s, and 70s in America, maybe a few in the 80s. But there are certain religions that have a more cultish nature than others, and Mormonism is definitely one of them. Islam is another, and there are others also. But we do especially work with folks in that regard because they just need a little more help to kind of integrate into what the church values most highly, which is free will in the person. well, we value salvation most highly, but we can't really love God without free will, and cults deprive us of free will. So I hope that's helpful. Good. Well, it's 4 minutes to 9. If anybody has a question, please ask it. Put it in the chat or raise your hand. And if you don't, then we will call it a night. And I'll be thankful for everyone who was on the call, and remind those who are watching this on YouTube that you can ask a question in the comment section below, or you can always ask a question. You can go to our website, and every Monday at noon, we post the fact that we'll be having the Curious Vlad, and we post a link to a forum where you can ask questions also. So please feel free to ask questions there, and we'll be very happy to answer those on the program. Okay, so it looks like there are not any other questions, and I want to thank everybody for joining tonight and for asking great questions. And let's say a prayer, and we will hope to see you next Monday on Curious Vlad. It is truly meet to bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless, and Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gave us birth to God, the Word, the very Theotokos, thee do we magnify. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Father. Have a good night.